They thought they humiliated me that day. In the middle of a budget review, Travis Cole, the CEO's golf buddy turned VP of strategy, announced I was redundant. 12 years of building the compliance backbone that kept $200 million in hospital contracts flowing, erased in seconds. Executives stared, HR smiled, and my badge was cut before I even left the room. But what they didn't know was simple. Without me, the entire firm was already dead. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. The budget review should have been routine, but instead, it became my execution. I sat at the glass table with files ready, prepared to walk the board through compliance updates when Travis Cole cleared his throat like he was delivering a sermon. He didn't look at the numbers. He looked at Richard Halston, then at me, and announced, "We've identified redundancies. Martha's role is no longer necessary." 12 years of work collapsed into a single sentence. The room went still. Richard fiddled with his watch to avoid eye contact. Janet Rowe from HR slid a packet across the table, each page already prepared. Travis leaned back, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I gathered my planner, stood and nodded once. No protest, no outburst, just silence. That silence unsettled them more than anger ever could. They wanted drama, tears, evidence of defeat. Instead, they got nothing. By the time I reached the elevator, my badge was deactivated. Within minutes, HR had drafted the announcement. After a mutual agreement, Martha Green will be leaving. Mutual, as though I had chosen the bullet. They called it a transition. I called it what it was, a dismissal meant to erase me in front of witnesses. But what Travis and Richard never understood was that you can strip a title, but you can't strip the foundation I built. They thought I was gone. They thought they had buried me. In truth, they had just freed me to move in silence with everything that mattered still in my hands. The strange thing about being erased is how efficient the machine becomes once it decides you don't matter. By the time I reached the sidewalk outside the glass tower, my keycard was already dead, my inbox rerouted, and a farewell Slack draft sat in HR's queue waiting for approval. The message, I later heard, read like a eulogy. After careful consideration and a mutual agreement, Martha Green will be leaving to pursue new opportunities. Mutual. That word stung more than the firing itself, like they were painting my execution as a handshake. I didn't bother correcting it. Let them write their fiction. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. I didn't rage, didn't call friends, didn't post a dramatic exit on LinkedIn. Instead, I sat in my kitchen that night with a glass of wine and stared at the glow of my laptop. They had scrubbed me from the org chart, but I could still see the skeleton of the system I had built. I'd spent over a decade designing compliance frameworks that threaded through every hospital contract, every state audit, every insurance renewal. My name wasn't on the walls anymore, but my fingerprints were on the locks, the clauses, the licenses that Richard and Travis barely understood. The silence gave me cover. While they were busy drafting slogans about visionary pivots and new chapters, I watched from the shadows. Quiet is dangerous because it leaves arrogant men thinking they've already won. They pictured me defeated, boxed and labeled, gone for good. What they didn't realize was that quiet was my choice, not my consequence. I wasn't mourning the job they stripped from me. I was studying the cracks already forming in the empire they thought they controlled. It didn't take long for the rot to show. Travis Cole strutted into meetings like a savior, tossing out buzzwords with the confidence of a late-night infomercial host. AI dashboards will revolutionize our compliance flow, he declared, as though predictive analytics could replace the certifications and audits I had spent years negotiating with state regulators. He canceled 2 QA teams within his first month, claiming testing was an old-world expense, and handed oversight of critical hospital contracts to a former marketing intern who once thought HIPAA was a brand of yoga mat. The CEO, Richard Halston, nodded along, desperate to look modern, desperate not to admit he didn't understand a word. The first cracks appeared when our largest hospital client flagged a missed audit cycle. That had never happened under my watch. The compliance calendar wasn't just paperwork. It was the backbone of our ability to bill insurers, to legally process patient records. One missed audit meant every dollar tied to that hospital was suddenly at risk. Instead of addressing it, Travis announced a rebrand initiative, spending nearly 6 figures on influencer campaigns that produced 3 Instagram posts and a TikTok video where our name was misspelled. Inside the company, morale curdled. Engineers who once took pride in solving impossible deadlines were now fielding orders from consultants who couldn't define an API. Nina Patel, one of my sharpest engineers, started keeping quiet during meetings, her eyes down, but I knew that silence. I'd worn it myself. David Kim, who used to color code burn rate projections for fun, stopped submitting reports on time. Laura Sanchez, the product lead, watched helplessly as her roadmap was scrapped for Travis's half-baked innovation sprints. Hospitals began to notice delays, glitches, compliance gaps. Complaints piled up. Cash outflow ballooned. And yet, Richard and Travis walked the halls smiling, promising investors momentum. I didn't need inside access to know they were steering blind. Word spread quickly in healthcare networks, and whispers reached me from old contacts. Your company is slipping. Every dollar wasted, every audit missed, every careless cut confirmed what I already knew. The empire they thought they'd built was rotting from within. And the best part? They were too busy polishing their own reflections to notice the floorboards crumbling beneath them. The first crack of resistance came quietly, slipped into my inbox after midnight. It was from Nina Patel, an engineer too sharp to waste words. Attached was a spreadsheet bluntly titled Burn Rate Reality, columns showing costs spiraling out of control. In the margin, she had typed 3 words: he cut testing. No explanation, no plea. She knew I would understand. Days later, David Kim sent me a Dropbox link containing contract renewal logs, whole rows marked in red. Compliance certificates expired. It was the kind of mistake that could shut down hospital partnerships overnight, the exact safeguards Travis had dismissed as legacy clutter. Laura Sanchez followed with screenshots of bug reports piling up in the system, some untouched for months. Beneath them, her dry note read, "If patients were code, we'd be dead." I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. Their signals weren't cries for rescue. They were proof that beneath Travis's glossy slogans, people still cared about the integrity of the work. They weren't fighting for him. They were holding the line for what we had built together. The resistance wasn't loud or organized, but it was steady, a pulse in the middle of the collapse. Every margin note, every spreadsheet, every quiet hand keeping the cracks from spreading told me the same thing. The foundation was still mine. And when the time came, I would not be walking back into a dead company alone. Long before Travis Cole swaggered into that boardroom with his rehearsed lines, and Richard Halston gave his silent blessing, I had already prepared for the day someone would try to cut me out. 12 years ago, when the company was nothing more than a handful of contracts and a dream of selling compliance software to hospitals, I sat in my apartment with a stack of legal documents and a lawyer who charged by the hour but thought like a chess master. He warned me then that in business, betrayal wasn't a possibility, it was an inevitability. So we built protection. Not in the form of voting shares or board seats, because I knew those could be stripped or diluted, but in something far more critical: the licenses. Every state we operated in required certifications to handle sensitive hospital data, to process patient records, to pass federal audits. Without those licenses, we weren't a company. We were a pretty website with no legal right to function. Back then, while everyone else argued over branding and product design, I filed paperwork. I registered an LLC under my own control, quietly securing each compliance license through that entity instead of the company's direct name. It wasn't fraud. It was foresight. The company had full usage rights as long as I authorized them, but the legal ownership remained mine. I paid the renewals, managed the audits, signed the dotted lines when no one else even knew what the clauses meant. Richard didn't ask questions because results arrived on his desk, neatly packaged, stamped, and approved. Travis hadn't even entered the picture yet. That LLC became my fortress, buried beneath layers of contracts and regulatory filings, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. The board thought the company owned its infrastructure. In reality, it was leasing its right to breathe from me. And here's the part Travis could never understand. You can replace a title, you can deactivate an email, you can even humiliate someone in a room full of executives, but you cannot fire the backbone of your business if she has already built the locks around it. While Richard and Travis paraded their vision to investors, I sat at my kitchen table with my files, smiling at the clauses they didn't know existed. Every hospital contract was tethered to my signature. Every compliance renewal required my LLC's approval. Without it, their $200 million empire was just smoke. They thought I was gone. They thought they had erased me. But what they really did was hand me the perfect alibi. An outsider who looked powerless while secretly holding the company's beating heart in her pocket. Once I knew the licenses were safe in my hands, I shifted focus from defense to proof. Revenge isn't about emotion, it's about documentation. I logged into systems they hadn't thought to lock down and watched in real time as the company bled itself dry. Burn rate reports showed cash evaporating 3 times faster than revenue was coming in. Vendor invoices piled up for projects that never launched. One file listed $87,000 for a culture campaign that turned out to be beanbags and kombucha machines. Another line item showed $140,000 wasted on a brand influencer who mentioned our product once, called it the wrong name, and never posted again. Hospitals were angrier than I had ever seen. Letters arrived threatening to pull contracts unless audits were corrected immediately. One client even suspended payments until certifications were verified, which of course required my authorization. Travis didn't understand the danger. He called them negotiation tactics. Richard ignored the red flags, too busy chasing the next investor call. Meanwhile, engineers fed me breadcrumbs: Nina's spreadsheets, David's renewal logs, Laura's bug lists. They weren't just venting, they were handing me ammunition. Piece by piece, I built a dossier that told a story no board could ignore. A company hemorrhaging cash, abandoning compliance, and gambling with contracts worth hundreds of millions. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to storm back into the office. I only needed to wait until the right audience was watching, until silence could be shattered with evidence too precise to dispute. They thought my firing had ended my relevance. What it really did was give me the perfect angle. I wasn't just a former COO with an axe to grind. I was an outside observer with receipts. I knew I couldn't do it alone. Evidence is powerful, but evidence without a stage is just paper gathering dust. That's when I reached out to Ethan Brooks, our AV director, the man everyone jokingly called Sound Guy, but who had quietly kept our demos, launches, and investor calls alive for years. Ethan wasn't flashy, he wasn't corporate, and that was why I trusted him. He had been pushed aside when Travis brought in a slick media agency from Los Angeles, the kind of team that showed up late to their own onboarding call. Ethan was reassigned to menial tasks, wheeling projectors, fixing broken speakers. Yet he never truly left the booth. He still had keys to the system because he had built half of it himself. I found his personal email buried in an old contact sheet. My message was short. Do you still believe in what we built? His reply came in less than 5 minutes. Tell me when. We met in the back of a downtown cafe, not like conspirators, but like old friends. I laid out what I had gathered: the spreadsheets, the expired licenses, the hospital complaints. He didn't flinch. He just asked, "What do you want to happen?" I told him the truth. I didn't want a scene. I wanted a mirror. I wanted Richard, Travis, the investors, and the entire company to see exactly who held the real power. Ethan smiled, tapped the table, and said, "Then we hijack the feed." The plan was simple, but brutal. Travis was planning a massive investor livestream to announce his so-called new era. Ethan would cut his mic, freeze the deck, and hand control to me. No theatrics, no smoke, just truth, slide by slide. Quietly, we shook hands. Quietly, the countdown began. Friday morning, the countdown clock ticked across every employee's screen. Investor livestream begins in 10 o'clock. Travis Cole was backstage, pacing in circles in what he insisted the team call the executive green room, though it was nothing more than a repurposed conference space. He wore a white blazer with no tie, hair slicked back, mumbling lines into a mirror like he was auditioning for a reality show. Richard Halston hovered nearby, quiet and distracted, pretending to review notes while praying Travis would deliver a miracle that would keep the board at bay. The live stream opened with the company logo flashing across laptops from Boston to San Diego. Employees tuned in. Investors logged on. Hospital administrators clicked in from their offices, waiting to hear what new vision was about to be unveiled. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cold, laptop hardwired into Ethan's patched-in stream. My hands rested on the files stacked beside me: licenses, contracts, renewal notices, all signed by me, all tethered to my LLC. Ethan's voice crackled in my ear once through a hidden comm line: "Signal steady. On your mark." At 9:58, Travis strutted onto the stage, arms wide, his voice booming. "This is the dawn of a new chapter." And then, silence. Crisp, clean, engineered silence. His lips moved, his hands gestured, but the mic was dead. Confusion rippled across the audience. He tapped the mic, frowned, looked toward the booth. Ethan gave him nothing. Then the screens behind him flickered. Gone were the flashy brand slides. In their place, a single, sterile white slide with black text. Compliance licenses, ownership, and authorization. A chart appeared. Every license the company depended on was listed, each one stamped with the name of my LLC. Across the bottom, Martha Green, authorized signatory. The feed didn't cut. It rolled forward, slide after slide, hospital contracts with renewal clauses highlighted, state filings showing my signatures, certificates of good standing from federal agencies, evidence laid out like an autopsy, clinical and indisputable. Travis froze mid-gesture, caught on camera with a hand raised like a mannequin in shock. His smile faltered, his face pale. Investors leaned in. Employees leaned closer to their screens. Then came the timeline slide. Ownership structure established, 2011. Last renewal, 4 weeks ago. My name printed beneath it in bold. Richard shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that he had let his puppet lead them into ruin. Travis tried to shout something off mic, mouthing words like unauthorized and fraud. But nothing carried. Ethan's hand remained steady on the switchboard. The next slide hit like a hammer. Without authorization, hospital contracts cannot be renewed. Beneath it, a projection graph. $200 million in revenue tied directly to my approval. Gasps echoed through muted conference calls. Slack channels inside the company froze in disbelief. And then, the final slide: effective control rests with Martha Green, compliance architect. No logo, no colors, just truth in black and white. Finally, the camera shifted. My face appeared on screen, calm, composed, lit only by the glow of my monitor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply looked into the lens and said, "You fired me. You erased me. But you forgot one thing. You can't run this company without me." I let the silence linger, heavy and undeniable. Travis stumbled backward, powerless. Richard buried his face in his hands. Across 4 time zones, the company finally saw who truly held the keys. When the live stream ended, I didn't celebrate. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet, letting the weight of truth settle. Within hours, investors demanded answers. Hospital administrators bypassed Richard and Travis and reached out to me directly, asking how their contracts could be secured. The reality was simple. Without my authorization, nothing could move forward. Within weeks, agreements were signed with my LLC, and the old firm began to unravel from the inside. Employees left in waves, some sending me short notes of thanks for exposing what they had endured in silence. Travis was quietly removed, his grand speeches replaced with a single bland update about leadership transitions. Richard disappeared from view, swallowed by the very weakness he had tried to hide. But for me, the victory wasn't about watching them collapse. It was about choosing not to return. I had no desire to rebuild a house that had treated me as expendable. Instead, I built something of my own, leaner, sharper, and stronger, serving the very hospitals they had neglected. Revenge, I realized, isn't about burning everything down. It's about drawing a line, forcing consequences to land where they belong, and walking forward free. They thought firing me ended my story. Instead, it gave me the freedom to write a new one that was mine alone. What I learned through all of this is something deeper than corporate revenge. Getting fired in public by people who didn't understand my value was humiliating, yes, but it also forced me to see where real power lives. It doesn't sit in titles or corner offices. It sits in preparation, in foresight, and in the quiet knowledge of your own worth. Travis and Richard wanted me erased because I made them uncomfortable, because competence exposes incompetence. But their attempt to bury me only reminded me of the fortress I had already built. My licenses, my systems, my reputation with clients, those were mine. No one could take them. The lesson isn't that you should spend your life waiting for betrayal. The lesson is that you should quietly prepare for it while still giving your best. In work and in life, people will sometimes underestimate you, replace you, or discard you because they mistake loyalty for weakness. Don't waste energy begging them to see your value. Instead, invest in protecting the foundation you've built. Skills, relationships, foresight, those things carry with you long after a company or a boss decides you're redundant. And when betrayal comes, you don't need fireworks to prove them wrong. You need only enough truth to let the consequences land where they belong. My revenge wasn't about burning the company to ashes. It was about making sure those who dismissed me face the reality they tried to ignore and walking forward free. How to get started today. 1. Take inventory of what you control that no one can strip away. Skills, knowledge, certifications. 2. Build quiet safeguards, savings, side projects, networks. 3. Remember that silence can be power. You don't need to shout when the truth speaks for itself. Before you go, comment below where you're watching from. Share this with someone who's been underestimated and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story.